when you get out into the work world, what do? You're just thrown into groups, and you don't necessarily have a choice. You never have a choice of who is going to be on your team, unless you're very, very high up and you can select your team. But I think addressing what you said about how to get over that feeling, it's really, that feeling is the resistance. If every student could go into the group setting, number one, feeling a little bit more relaxed about it, because the minute you're stressed out, you're just bringing that to the table, and that's negative energy in and of itself. Checking your own ego at the door. It's how you show up. That's the first part, getting yourself in check, because you're right. There's a lot of negative attitudes around that, and just remembering that group work can be a way to add your collective intelligence, and it doesn't have to always be that why am I doing everything, because that's the biggest groan.
Welcome to Pints and Pizza with Professors, a podcast dedicated to help you, the college student, crush it in the classroom and in your careers.
We're just two college professors with an obsession for learning and a great slice of pie, throwing out no BS truth bombs to help guide you through the unknown.
We also celebrate the ideas and talents of emerging professionals and embrace the learning culture of now.
We're all adults having adult conversations, so adult language might be used.
Hey, grab a slice of pie, grab a pint, and let's go shoot the ish. It is another edition, the Episode 4 edition of Pints and Pizza with Professors. We're talking the group work blues here today. We have a great guest, but first, before I start singing and really destroy everyone's ears, let me welcome in my co-host, Megan Wagner. Megan, how are you?
Oh, good. This is like a carryover from episode 2 and the OJs with money, money, money.
Yes.
I think, you know what? I think secretly you and I just want to be musicians, and we use this to kind of embarrass ourselves into pretending like we're musicians.
Yeah, I would have
So that's
been
pretty funny.
X'd off the X Factor and not even gotten a chair turn on The Voice and American Idol. I wouldn't even gotten a chance to go to California. So I think
I would have been ridiculed by Simon Cowell for sure. Oh, forget it.
yeah,
Done.
I think we've definitely found our calling in what we're doing in communications, and I don't think communicating musically is probably should be part of our repertoire unless we're in the car and singing.
Yeah. Well, before we get started, we just want to thank everybody who has listened to our prior episodes, episodes 1, 2, and 3, and the 2 bonus episodes we recorded. We just checked the stats, and hundreds of people are listening to Pints and Pizza with Professors. That is so great, you guys. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we're
excited.
really happy with how people have listened to the podcast, and great to see how many people have really enjoyed listening so far. We hope you continue to watch. We would also love it if you would rate us on iTunes, leave a review, tell us what you think. If there was a guest so far that you've liked or there was a segment that you enjoyed, please hit it up in iTunes. We're on iTunes. We're on Spotify. We're on Google Play. You can share the podcast on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. We're everywhere. You're everywhere. Let people know what you think and whether you're listening. And we want to get all of that great information out to people. So thank you. But we also ask, as a further thank you, to rate us and comment and leave us all the good stuff, and leave us stuff that you'd like to see maybe on the show, or maybe things we can improve. We're an equal opportunity listening podcast.
Yeah. And also, if there's someone that you feel would benefit from what we have to share, please feel free to share the podcast with them, because sharing is caring, right?
That is right. It's like the old G.I. Joe, and now you know, and knowing is half the battle.
Yeah.
So there you go.
There we go. So we're talking about group work blues today. Oh my goodness. Oh, I kind of get some like flashbacks with group work. Don't you?
Yeah. I think group work can, in both school and outside of, the educational side of things, when we've had to work in groups before. I think when students are thinking about it, they're either really excited about group work, or it's as it gets on, it's there's always one or two people, or maybe three people in a 5-person group that are you have to kind of, all right, people, let's go, we got to move it. And then as you're in the working world, and if you're in an agency or you're working for a client, you have to work in a group. And if there's someone that is like the wrench in the like throwing the wrench into the cog of the wheel, that can be a big issue. So, but then there are, as we tend to do sometimes in public relations, we look at the we look at the little bit of the negative to see how we can improve. But there are
Mhm.
also plenty of opportunities that we've all had that you could say, you know what, I really love that group experience. I really enjoyed seeing how it played out in the classroom from my perspective. But
Mhm.
then there was also times in my days, really working in agency, but then consulting that would really worked out well. So, Megan, let me ask you that in your career, both starting out and then as you've gotten on, what were some of your, what was one of your great group experiences and one of the ones that was not so great?
Oh boy. Um, well, and this is going to really surprise people when I say that what my best group work experience was. It actually wasn't in a workplace or it wasn't in the classroom. It was actually fulfilling my civic duty and it was serving on jury duty.
Oh, wow.
I know, right? People dread jury duty, and I did. Like, I got called. I had, I was living in Western New York, and it was for I want to say it's the county that I got called to serve, and I got called for jury duty, and I was like, just I went kicking and screaming. I was so mad. I was like, I don't want to do this. Like, I mean, like a lot of people do. They're like, oh, I got called for jury duty. Crap. And I went kicking and screaming, and it was an insurance case. So it was an insurance type trial, and my dad's a former insurance agent, and they were like, Miss Wagner, how do you feel about insurance? And I'm like, I love insurance. It put it put food in my stomach, it put clothes on my back, it put me through college. And and then they were like, what do you do for work? I'm like, I work in the media. My husband works in the media. Like, they're not going to touch me with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah.
Well, guess what?
Yep. Hmm.
I was picked. I was like, oh, you got to be kidding me. So I went kicking and screaming. I was like, shit, I don't want to do this. Like most people.
Yeah.
And actually, the people that I served with, the other jurors, they were all women, except for one gentleman. He was an elderly gentleman. His name was Jim, and he was a joy. And we just loved hearing his stories. And I mean, he was just awesome. And then all the other women were just so much fun to be around. And it was a really great experience. And what ended up happening is, when we had to deliver to corroborate. When the testimony had wrapped up, we all kind of looked over the evidence. We took about it was pretty much an open and closed case, and a lot of us after the trial ended were like, why did this even go to trial? Because it was kind of ridiculous. So we actually worked really well together, but we double checked things and we heard different perspectives. And, it turned out we had a unanimous vote as to, who was going to win the case. So it was people I never would have ordinarily met, and they were great. And that was a very, very great experience. The judge was awesome. The bailiff was awesome. It was overall just a very, very good experience. So that was my best group work experience. My worst was I was working for a company, and they wanted to put together this special campaign. And at the time, I was head of marketing,
Hmm.
and they wanted other people in the company to kind of come together and have their voices, heard, have their ideas listened to, which I think is an amazing idea. So that was literally the only thing that they got right about this. And so we all came together. We came up with some really great ideas, submitted them to the executives, and they were all swatted away.
Oh,
And spoiler alert, the campaign went bust.
yeah.
It's like, no kidding. Yeah. And everyone in the group was just deflated. They were frankly angry because they're spending all this extra time to help out with this. And it was just very, very discouraging. And that's one thing that in our interview with our guest, which I know you're going to talk about in a minute, but this one thing that we talk about on this episode is how to speak up, how to have your voice heard when you're in the workplace, and how to deal with the frustration when it's not heard.
Yeah.
So, so those are my best and worst cases. How about you?
Well, actually, I think some of my best group work, some of the ones that I remember the most actually are with our guest, which we'll get to momentarily, which is Deirdre Breakenridge. She and I have collaborated on a number of occasions over the years, and we worked on two projects that we were really proud of. One was a rebranding, and the other one was for we were working with an organization where I ended up taking over the not taking over but overseeing the social media side of things. But it was because of the collaboration and because of the communication that made for a really great experience. And it comes down to, as we always say, communication. The more you communicate, and the more obviously that you deal with people that understand that you're working together, not like kind of against each other. And I don't mean that in a negative way. It's like you have all of these ideas coming together and everyone says, oh, this mine's good too. And this, oh, let's get them all together and we'll make it. It doesn't always work that way. So you
Right.
sort of have to
Right.
understand in group work that, all right, you may love your idea, but if someone's idea is going to combine what you said with theirs and make it even better, you have to kind of park the ego and say, all right, I came up, but we're working on this together. And that happened a lot. You deal with the egos, but I overall that those experiences with Deirdre were really outstanding. I also need to add that while that was the best experience, I've seen some really outstanding ones in the classroom. A lot of my students, when I assign projects, we do group work. That's part of the end of the semester, kind of like the final project is their group presentation. And I've been really impressed with the amount of presentations that I've seen over the years. Just the care, the collaboration. I make sure that we have touch points throughout the semester. I give them 10, 15 minutes at the end of class so that they can actually talk in person instead of doing it all over a Google Doc or a text message or something. So
Mhm.
I get to see it in the classroom. The not so great collaborations for group work would probably go back to my early days in public relations where um, we did have to work together, but the communication was not effective. It was more of, okay, this is what we're doing, and you need to buy into it. Well, if you're trying to develop ideas and you have one person saying you need to buy into this, how are you supposed to actually come up with something creative when you're not asked to be creative? You're just asked to kind of go along and say, all right, this is the path we're taking to the ship. We're not going to go around. We're not going to avoid the hurricane. We're going straight through. Well, that's not going to go very well. Um,
Exactly.
you
I
know,
hate it when that kind of goes back to my example too. It's like, okay, this is what we're doing, make it work. Like fit a square peg into a round hole,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
exactly. And I
That's the
just think that,
worst.
it's terrible. And I don't think that, and one of the things that always frustrates me is when you have the opportunity to really show who you are as a communicator, public relations, marketing, social
Mm,
digital media.
yeah.
If you're not working together as a group, if you're not really coming together, it's not a group. It's five individuals, six individuals coming up with ideas. That's not a group. That's
Mhm.
fracturing. That's, you're not together. So I think one of the things that we need to do when we talk about it when these perspectives of sort of the negative experiences that we've had, we can look back to say, yeah, this wasn't really group work. It was more of a directive and get on board. And I think those are the ones, especially nowadays, when you see things fail, like you said, big surprise, it didn't work because no one, not everyone was on board, and it was more of a, like you said, square peg round hole. So those would be my experiences rather, and I think that's where we can, we come in and say, this is where our guest Deirdre Breakenridge really can shed some light on the things that she's experienced over the years, and how what she feels can make for effective group work, not just in the professional setting, but at school too.
Yeah, and I feel like you can take those negative experiences with group work or working with management or executives or whatever, and then when you get to that point someday, when you're the person making decisions, you can take that experience and now know what not to do. I feel that with any kind of negative experience in the workplace or in the classroom, you can take whatever was really rubbing you the wrong way or really bothering you, and then taking that forward, you could be like, okay, that doesn't work. Now let's try it.
Right.
Let's try it another way. So not all bad experience can be in vain, but
Yeah, no, you're right. And it should, those experiences I think have made us better communicators and better strategists and better teachers. All of the sort of, and I always, like I said, I hate to use the word negative, but they're all learning experiences. We're all
right.
growing from the mistakes or the things we see that may not be kosher and feel like it works the right way.
Hmm.
So we've all learned from those, not so great experiences, and we've hopefully turned them and pushed them onto our students and let them know that, hey, we've had enough of experience with group work. Now let me show you how I believe it could work for you. And then you have to let students, and sometimes you have to let them sometimes not fail but struggle a little bit to understand, look, you have a lot of egos, or and I don't say ego is like everyone's in the clouds, but it's more of, we all have our opinions, we all have our strong feelings, but it's how we put that aside to say, if we don't work together, this is not going to succeed. So everything is a learning experience, and like we always say, we're students. We're still
Hmm.
students of the profession of in education and marketing and communications, and we learn each day. So I think that's where, even if it didn't work out, we've taken those experience and made it better, made ourselves better.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are so excited to have Deirdre Breakenridge on Pints and Pizza with Professors. Her interview was just so refreshing, and
Mm.
I came away, I was like, where's Deirdre been all my life? She was just so incredible to chat with. And our listeners are you guys are really in for a treat. She's the best. And Jason, you can kind of talk more about her accolades and your connection to her. You'll learn the backstory in the interview. But she is just a real treat to have. We're very lucky to have her on the
Yeah,
on the
she
show.
really is. She's a great friend. She's a just a real seasoned professional, and I say seasoned with all of the respect, because her book back in 2008, which was called PR 2.0: New Media, New Tools, and New Audiences, really, in many ways, um, set the table for how public relations would evolve over the next number of years. You think back today, and it's like, oh, really? That's how we were thinking in public relations. Well, the great thing about Deirdre is she's always been forward thinking, and whether it was in her years in an agency, but then in her time as launching her own consulting business, but then also launching her own company, she's evolved over the times. She hosts her own podcast called Women Worldwide. She's done Linda courses with LinkedIn. She's collaborated and consulted and advised, everyone from, PR professionals to people that need, guidance when it comes to students. She's an educator. So I'm thoroughly excited to really welcome her to Pints and Pizza with Professors. I think you'll find her conversation with us to be really inspiring, but also educational, both as a student and a professional. So without further ado, I give you Deirdre Breakenridge. Well, it is my pleasure and honor to welcome a good friend and a trusted mentor and just an all around great professional, Deirdre Breakenridge, to the Pints and Pizza with Professors podcast. Deirdre, it's Megan and Jason. How are you today?
I'm doing really well. Thank you, Jason, and thank you, Megan, for having me on your show.
Deirdre, it's so nice to have you on here, and I know just in my conversations with Jason, he has spoken so highly of you. So it's so nice to finally put a voice to a name. So this is so great. Thank you for spending the time with us today.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure. I love what you guys are doing.
Well, real quickly, I want to just a quick story that I wanted to share. So when, obviously Megan and I were in Buffalo at the same time, and I already started working with the Bisons, but at that time I got, canned for my job. And I remember Deirdre and I had a quick, like I had tweeted out something that I was let go or whatever. And I reached out to Deirdre and just said, "Hey, I wanted to get some insights from you about, the industry, about, being on your own." And it was that moment that Deirdre and she said, "Oh, yeah, call me and we'll chat." And then from that day forward, we've either worked together or collaborated on something. And it was that sort of feeling of you have people in the industry that, not just care, but it's that paying it forward idea of giving back. And I've always been appreciative of Deirdre's, friendship and also just, at a time that could have been, was very difficult, really, opened up her proverbial shop to me and let me, get back on my feet. And I'll always be appreciative of that.
Oh, Jason, thank you for sharing that because I remember when you reached out and I was so happy to chat with you because I needed someone like you to help me. So I was helping you out and we've had great collaboration ever since. And that's why I always say to students and young professionals that, ask. Do that outreach, connect with people because you just never know whatever your situation is and who you bring into your world. You can do great things together. And I think we have.
Yeah, I think so too. And that's one of the reasons why Megan and I wanted to collaborate on a podcast. We have talked about this for so long, and one of the people that we had both talked about was having you on. So I think one of the things that you've had a wealth of success and experience in your career. One of the things that, especially in the classroom as well, I should say, one of the things we always hear about from students when we talk is that collective groan, like that feeling that they get when we hear the words group work. If it's not hearing about a midterm or a final, it's usually when you say group work, you get that feeling. So what can we do to reshape sort of that thinking of and show how valuable being in group work and doing group work now in at college and in school, and how valuable a learning experience it is, not just for while they're in class but in the future?
Yeah, well, you just pegged it. And both you and Megan know that when you get out into the work world, what do? You're just thrown into groups. And you don't necessarily have a choice. You never have a choice of who is going to be on your team, unless you're very, very high up and you can select your team. But I think addressing what you said about how to get over that feeling, it's really that feeling is the resistance. If every student could go into the group setting, number one, feeling a little bit more relaxed about it, because the minute you're stressed out, you're just bringing that to the table, and that's negative energy in and of itself. Checking your own ego at the door. It's how you show up. That's the first part, getting yourself in check, because you're right. There's a lot of negative attitudes around that, and just remembering that group work can be a way to add your collective intelligence, and it doesn't have to always be that why am I doing everything, because that's the biggest groan. That I don't Have you heard that where students just say, oh, I'm going to end up doing everything and nobody's going to help?
Yeah,
Yes, all the
absolutely.
time, all the time, and I've been at the receiving end of that, for sure, because I in certain groups, not only in college, but also in the workplace as well. It's kind of like I've taken on that, "Oh, I'm going to do everything. And I think that also speaks to one's personality, because that is my personality, is to take on things to a fault, quite honestly.
Right.
And when you are mixing these different personalities and these different backgrounds, then you are going to get that person who has to be the super person and, be the leader. And, then there's some people in the group that maybe don't have that trait or that personality. So you are going to get this kind of balance or misbalance of power in the group.
Yes. And I think something that you just said, Megan, that really resonates with me, somebody has to be a leader. And whether you're in college and you're on a team, it's a class project, or you're within the workplace, I think that being the leader also means trying to draw out the gifts of others so that, and I've done it too. I remember college projects where I would just be like, oh, okay, you're sitting on this, I'll just do it. And I think it really is up to the folks who tend to take on too much to a fault to check themselves and to say, okay, so maybe this isn't the right part of the project for this particular person, but what is their gift? And identifying that as early as possible, and getting people to feel comfortable also as a team. And I think that there's ways that students and professionals can work on that. So when the project starts, you're more aligned.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think it goes back to not being able to pick your teams, because when we do pick our teams, then we naturally want people that are more like us to be a part of the group, because that's what makes us more comfortable. And Jason and I, back in episode 3. So if you haven't listened to episode 3, we had a really great conversation with Priya Doshi about
Oh, Priya,
diversity in the
I love her.
workplace. Yeah, it was a really great episode. So if you haven't listened to episode 3, please go back and listen. But we talk a lot about diversity and how we naturally are gravitating toward people who are like us, when in fact that can be more hurtful to us as a professional and frankly as a person when we do that. And so group work is really no different, because we're surrounding ourselves, or actually, whether it be voluntary or involuntary, we're part of these groups of people that are different than us. So actually, when you are working with different personalities, different backgrounds, that can actually help you in the long run, even it may be kind of frustrating in the beginning.
That is a really good point. I think that sometimes our frustration, sometimes this feeling of, oh, I'm going to go into my corner, revert to my corner because I'm not understanding, does come from a place of fear and not understanding. And in order to you have to face your fears, but that takes a moment. That takes a conscious moment to hear somebody else's perspective. And rather than have a knee jerk reaction because it is different and that person is different from you, it's to be able to question and to probe and to learn a little bit more and to ask pointed questions to say, why do you think that, or how did you come to this conclusion? We can't, if we operate in an echo chamber, and you're right, you said that if we just keep people like us, whether we're doing it in school or on social media, um, you're not open. The richness of diversity gives you so much perspective, and that's what makes us grow. So
Mhm. Yeah. So I have to ask, just because this topic is throwing me back to my days at Indiana State University when I was in the School of Business, and a lot of our projects were group based. I remember being a part of a group, and some of them were great, some of them not so much. But I remember there was that one person that no matter what you did to try and engage them, try and speak to their strengths, there was that one person that just slacked
yep.
off. So, how do you best deal with a group member, whether it be in the classroom setting or in a professional setting, who is slacking off? And then, I guess the second part to that is, how do you cope with the frustrations of that particular group member without causing more friction and resentment in the group?
That's a really tough one. So I remember when I was at NYU in the classroom, and Jason, you came to my classroom. You actually lectured
Yep,
there.
I
I
did.
remember.
Hmm.
Yeah,
That was
I
great.
thank you. I think it was actually that group. Um, There was one group of students that was having a particularly challenging time with one student. And no matter what they did, and they came to me. That is one thing, and I didn't mind. It wasn't like the tattletale syndrome. It literally was, we want to help this person. We want this person to engage. We want this person to take credit for all the great ideas that are going to come out. And, when push came to shove, if you have a person who is not willing to go the distance and everybody else is, then at the end of the day, it kind of has to be known that they're not going to be graded the same way. And I think, in school, particularly professors can tell who's doing what. So sometimes I say to students right up front, let the chips fall where they may. Never stop trying. You always want to get people engaged, but we're not stupid. you know, like we can kind of
Right,
tell
right.
what's going on with the dynamics in most presentations. People put their names on certain things that they're doing. All the group members are presenting. Maybe you're given an overall group grade, but it goes also to the person as well.
Yeah, one thing that I remember we did in one of our classes was we actually graded each other in the group.
Yes. Yep.
So that's a really good, and they were anonymous. So it was a really good indicator, at least to the professor, that, okay, if Bob, Sandy, Dave, and Mary were, all in the group and Mary kept getting F's
Yep.
from the other three, then that was a really good indicator of, who was the weak link or who wasn't pulling their weight.
Absolutely. And that's what happens in companies today. So, my husband is with EY now for years, and they do peer review. And you are required to, and it's a part of performance review. So, can you imagine if you're on a team, you can't get away with that, because whether
Right.
your direct supervisor, your director knows it or not, there's a whole bunch of leads and teammates. You're getting graded through these reviews,
Mhm.
and it's very transparent and everybody knows it. And it's also an opportunity for whoever is reviewing you to share, to help, to say, hey, here's what you could do. This is what I'd like to see from you. So I think what you stated carries into the work world, where there's going to be even more transparency and peer review. And that's how we get out of this syndrome of this one does everything and these folks do nothing.
Right,
Let me make a just kind of devil's advocate, and I don't do this to be difficult, but there are in the classroom we've all seen where when we do this evaluation, and I bring this up because I've seen it firsthand. Because I'm asking all my students when we do group work to ask them to evaluate their fellow students. It's anonymous, obviously, but I always, without a doubt, get one group that's always fives across the board. I loved this group, blah blah blah, and it wasn't like the best done presentation that you could have seen. So, my
Hmm.
devil's advocate is, how do we get around then saying, it couldn't have been the best experience because the project itself wasn't as good as it could be in maybe my eyes. Maybe the students felt it was good. But how do we get around that then? Is there a way around it, if at all?
So sometimes I think that, and that's an interesting case where everybody's like fives across the board. Sometimes
Hmm.
it's really, as a part of that peer review, it's you have to call out what could have been better. And that's really important. And then when people are, I'm not going to say forced, but when people have to use their critical skills or critical eye to see what could have been better, and then, share what was good, it kind of says, how could this have been five across the board? So you're actually giving them the opportunity to give helpful, the feedback is a gift, and making them
Mhm.
realize that it's not just about, yeah, this is all good. You have to help people by saying, well, what else could have been better? I don't know if it's going to change the fives across the board, but it at least makes people step back to say, I have to have some level of transparency here. There is something else that they should have done.
Yeah, and that's what I agree with. I mean, yeah, a project that when the group together gives fives across the board, but it's a good project and they do a great job. Okay, I could buy into that a little bit, but when I end up seeing a project where it didn't come off as well, and frankly, in many ways, as students progress through school, as you get to the upper, being in a junior or senior upperclassman, you should see a level of, hey, look, I'm going to end up having to be evaluated in my job at some point. I'm going to have to work in a group. It may behoove me now to say, if I don't take my feedback or if I'm not accepting feedback in a group setting, well, then maybe I need to start listening better because otherwise, when I get in that situation in the real world, I'm going to get all
Yeah.
offended because, oh, how can I do this wrong? There's no way. In college I did everything well. Well, maybe you really didn't. So I think that I would think, and again, that wasn't me saying, oh, there's impossible to get honesty. It's more of, I
Yep.
want the
You want the
honesty. I want
transparency.
as much honesty as, yeah, because, and I do say this to students, and I know you've probably done this as well, Deirdre, and same thing with Megan is, if we're not getting the right feedback from students, we're basically, there's something, we sniff something, there's something up. Like, okay, that you can't just bypass the self evaluation, because if you can't evaluate yourself effectively, how are you going to look at a project that is actually, serious? Not to say grading isn't, but when you get into working in the agency world or you're running your own
Yeah, it's somebody
business,
else's
if you
money,
don't know,
right? Someone
right,
else's
exactly,
Right.
dollars.
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, think about it. If, in Deirdre and all the projects that you've done or I've seen, us work together on, if we weren't evaluated by someone, we could have think, oh, we're doing a great job. Why are we getting let go? Well, they didn't say anything. We're doing a great job. You need to hear that feedback. You have to be able to say, someone has to be able to tell you, hey, you know what? I really like what you did here, but you really need to focus in on
But do we
X.
teach feedback in the classroom? Do we teach? I mean, I think I remember in my MBA program a course on social organizational behavior. And I do think we had exercises on the right way to approach feedback, to help people and to not make them defensive. I don't remember that in undergraduate, number one. And I also know that just from speaking to millennials and college students today, so that would be Gen Z, they don't feel comfortable with feedback if it's not a trusting environment. So if you make the environment trusted, a safe space, and you approach it the right way, you will get the return, which is the more transparent, honest feedback of what's really going on, the good, the bad, and maybe the ugly.
That's a really great point, Megan. One of the things I think works for both of us in the classroom, but then it would also work, it then translates into the real world. Hey, why not take a few, maybe take a class and say, look, you're going to be evaluated on your feedback. If you're giving feedback to me and you feel comfortable doing that, this is how, or you don't feel comfortable, this is how you can do it in a way that makes you feel like I'm not really blasting someone in a letter or in an evaluation form. I'm giving them constructive pieces of information that can really help them evolve. We always talk about, being students always. Well, if we don't continue to evolve and listen to feedback, how are we learning? And that can be translated to students as well. Understand now how you can give good feedback, and then as you get into the real world, it can really help you become better professionals and more well-rounded
Yeah,
professionals.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know at St. Bonaventure University in the Integrated Marketing Communications program where I teach, we have talked at length about this, about how much feedback we give students and when we give it. Because what we have found over the last few years is that when students get to the end of the program and they are giving their thesis defenses, there are some really just some really lackluster results and a lot of disconnect. And so we're talking about providing
Yeah.
feedback earlier on to make sure the students, are thoroughly prepared to finish out the program strong and not have these areas of disconnect in their
Yeah,
thesis.
no, that's so important. Feedback early on. Otherwise, that could be the difference between doing a very, very good job on your thesis and being shocked
Right,
at what you
right.
deliver and it falling flat and being lackluster. That's so true.
Yeah. Now, Deirdre, I kind of want to pivot just for a minute away from more the classroom environment and maybe new professionals and their first job and internship. And when we talked earlier about diversity a bit, and for myself, I was always the youngest person in a management team, which is great. It was good for me. It was great experience early on. But what I found with younger professionals who I either hired or were part of different teams, they tend, they at least not from me, but from maybe more senior executives in an organization, there tend to be a dismissive attitude toward these younger professionals. It could be because they don't have enough experience, or maybe they don't have the knowledge set, which of course they don't, because they have not been in the industry or been in position real long. But how can younger professionals boost their credibility in these situations where maybe they're in a group or a committee or somewhere in a professional setting where they're expected to give their expertise and feedback, but maybe they're looked down upon, which I completely don't agree with, because younger professionals have
I
so much
know.
to offer, and it infuriates me when I see more seasoned professionals kind of look down on them, because guess what? When your iPad's broken, guess who's going to fix it? It's not going to, it's going to be the younger people that do it,
Exactly.
right? So, yeah. So how can a new professional kind of combat that and um, really kind of rise to the occasion and show the more seasoned professional, like, yes, I have good ideas. I have worth in this group.
So standing out sometimes means raising your hand and stepping out of your comfort zone at any age, at any level of your career. And I think it shows when you have a younger professional, even though you did mention there are leaders who are dismissive, and that's a shame, because not being able to identify true potential of younger professionals is just sad. There's such a disconnect there. That's
Absolutely.
very, very sad.
Absolutely.
Um, but
Yes.
as a younger professional, not to be discouraged, there are leaders and managers and supervisors who are looking for you. They're just waiting for you. And one of the ways I remember at my first internship, um, I just showed initiative. I gave it my heart, my all. I showed up there. I was literally waiting at the door when the senior vice president was coming in the morning. I was the first one there. He was forced to talk to me because there's nobody else. I would set up the office. I would read the magazines that he was reading. I would ask questions. I, if somebody, we were a small agency, so we all came to the table on a Monday morning. And if one of the executives or a supervisor would say, "Who can do this?" I would raise my hand and say, "I'll do it. I'll try it." That says something right there. They never cared that I didn't know how to do it. So there is something about showing up with your heart and your passion that makes you stand out. We often say you can't teach passion. It has to, you can draw it out, of somebody. So that is one way. And it also is your God-given talent. If you're younger and you are a tech whiz, you know social media, volunteering for some of those things. Let me help. Oh, let me show you how to do this, and being recognized for those skills, but yet listening and taking the time to understand the business and feeding yourself with what's going on with the company that can hopefully bridge a gap and get you recognized as somebody who has talent, has passion, and who's learning and like has believes in the company. If you show that you're interested in the business, you're showing you're interested in the company itself, and that speaks volumes.
Yeah, and the company itself has a responsibility to all employees, not just younger employees, but all employees, to take everyone's feedback and ideas and use that, actually use it. Because nothing is more sad to me than going to all this trouble and having a group, committee for the sake of having a group
Right.
committee. And I just remember my last corporate position I had, that I was let go from. I had a group of probably 4 or 5 millennials, 4 or 5, and they were awesome. They were kick ass. They were so much fun to be around. They had great ideas. I mean, I could have not asked for a better group. And I hope they're listening to this, because this is their little like shout out, because I just absolutely love them to death. So there was a member of my team that was asked to be part of a overall company committee, and she was a go-getter. She, had been promoted a few times by me because she
Oh,
was
that's
awesome.
awesome.
And
Good. I'm glad you
and so
recognize
she,
that.
yeah, oh, 100%. Like yeah. So she joined this overall company committee, and over time, after every meeting, I remember seeing her come back and just she looked
Oh,
defeated. And
doesn't that break your
just she
heart?
was, like, groaning. It broke my heart. I felt so bad, and I just it was awful, and I'm like, when companies do that, like, there is this responsibility on leaders. I don't care
Yes.
what level it is. There is a responsibility for leaders to create this culture and environment that is welcoming and constructive. And when that doesn't happen, that is when you're going to lose your best talent, because I tell you what, not a single one of those employees that I hired are currently with the
Wow.
company. They all left. They were all like, screw
Yeah, well,
this.
you
Like, and as they should,
as well they should. So you just pegged something very, very important. I've been studying millennials and having conversations for months now, just having one-on-one interviews with millennials. And they're speaking up, and they're speaking loudly in their actions, because 79% of millennials would leave an organization to go to another company that's more empathetic. I mean, that
Hmm.
is that is
Yeah,
just clear.
absolutely.
So for all those leaders who aren't understanding, who aren't taking the time to listen, who put up this, I don't really care what you're doing or who you are, that's not working. And millennials will be 75% of the workforce in 2025. So
Hmm.
leaders, wake up. I've done a few posts on my blog around this feel model. Face your fears, engage with empathy, use ethics and good judgment, and unleash the love. And one of the posts specifically was, leaders, this is what millennials don't like about you. Hello, anybody out there? And then I just recently did a post, leaders, good news. Here's what millennials do like. So I
Right.
really think there is this gap. And from everything that I've studied, and for all the social media I've analyzed, and from all these conversations and my notes, feel that model is, if you can feel on both sides, it works both ways, you're actually going to have better relationships. Leaders, you're going to keep people in your companies. You're going to have better relationships through all of your communication channels.
So this would be a good point where we actually mention that this feel first initiative or Feel First research that you're doing that you've been talking about on the blog recently and over the last few months. So, in many ways, I'm always intrigued by how each generation, each age group, whether we label it as millennials or Gen Z, Gen Y, baby boomers, etc., each generation has had their way, they've had their own personality. So, with all of these different personalities, and now you're focusing with Feel First on the millennial generation, how do we end up working best with, say, the millennial generation? How do we put different personalities, different groups of ages, in a sense? How do we balance that and make it easier for us to work
So
together?
I think that one thing that I'm trying to do through the feel model is to get an understanding between the different groups. So we've created this web app, or it's a feel first test. And it's not it's in beta testing now, but we're putting a database behind it and we're capturing the demographics of the people who take this test because, and we're going to be able to find out how different professionals of different ages score in all of the areas of feel, empathy. So it's facing fears, which is really being open, that's the diversity, the inclusion, the empathy piece, the ethics piece, and the unleash your love. And as we start to gather data around this, it's certainly going to show, based on generation, who feels more in what areas and in what industries. So that's going to be really interesting to see. And what I'm also doing is speaking. Well, this is the other part of my research with millennials. I'm asking them what would make it better. What, how do they see the situation changing? And they've shared a lot on social media what they would like to see and what some of the better leaders are doing. But this also goes across all touch points, and especially within the workplace, because they all need to show up, work in groups. You're not just going to have a millennial team. No, your team should be completely mixed with all different ages, with all different backgrounds and ethnicities. So the more research that I do, I'm just learning that all people, and it's not just millennials, I think everybody could use a little bit of feel and that model.
I like that because I think in many ways we've had so many different ideas. And this is I think in many ways, we're now starting to see how the millennial generation of folks have not adapted, but their take on what happens in the workforce. They've gone through college. Some of them have gone for their masters and gotten a graduate degree. Now they're reshaping the industry and reshaping the world in a sense on how we should be viewed or how everyone should be viewed in the workforce. So I wonder how now, as that research that you're doing comes into play and the things that you've seen, are there two or three things that you could tell us that look to be things that we could all use moving forward? And I'm not just talking
Yeah.
about groupthink or
I
group.
mean, I thought it was really interesting when I was talking to one millennial, and I like the light bulbs were just popping on in my head. And she was saying, even though I'm in a company, I'm treated like an entrepreneur because they're very entrepreneurial, millennials, and they
Hmm.
want to have ownership and they want to feel pride in what they do. And I think organizations that build a culture of entrepreneurial spirit are going to do very well with millennials. And frankly, who doesn't? Name a generation who wouldn't appreciate that. We're always talking about entrepreneurs and all the great things that they're doing. Can you imagine bringing that into the corporation? So
Hmm.
that is definitely one thing. I've had other millennials share, I touched a little bit upon the trusted environment. And what does it take to build that trust between yourself, your peers, and even your supervisor? Because one millennial pointed out, just even if every single leader decided to become compassionate at my workplace, doesn't mean I'd actually tell them what's going on in my life. So I might be having a really hard day, and they might take an opportunity to be compassionate and say, hey, what's the matter? Well, this millennial pretty much flat up told me, I would say, oh, nothing, I'm fine. Well, it works both
Wow.
ways. So in order to, what would make the trust? And of course, that's a vulnerability piece. That's leaders or anybody showing up and kind of showing your challenges, showing that you're real, that you have bad times too, and maybe asking for help yourself. The other thing, I mean, I I notice that millennials, when it comes to, this is the feedback too, in their workplace, because this is a part of the trusted environment. Some of the millennials said, I don't mind feedback when it comes to me, as I've done it this way in my experience and it's worked. You might want to try it. I see what you're trying to do. It's reframing how you approach certain things, to build that trust, to get to a level of, hey, try this. So I don't know. I'm thinking it's a different environment, and we're all going to have to work hard, but feel will be a part of it for any generation that we're dealing with.
Yeah, it's incredibly important. I think we're all looking at a way to make sure that, at least from a PR, communications, marketing, we're still trying to, I think, in some
Yeah.
ways, figure out what we're going to label ourselves even 10, 11, 12 years in. How we adapt the workplace for all people involved, because, I think we look at it from a perspective of 40 plus. We still envision ourselves in the workplace going up to a certain time. So we better make sure that we are as adaptive as possible and being that sort of student of the industry. And by listening to what the millennials are saying and listening to what other generations are saying, I think bringing that all together and thinking about it will be a better group, and it'll be a
Yeah.
better workplace for
Listen, be
everyone.
human. Oh, and by the way, if you're not bringing your values and good judgment and
Hmm.
your ethics forward, you're not going to build an environment of trust. And that's another statistic. I forgot if it was Pew Research or Deloitte survey, but it was a very low stat on the number of millennials who actually thought their leaders and companies were being ethical. And so, how do you have a trusted
Wow.
environment within your company if your own employees are like, you guys aren't telling the truth? You're unethical. It's not
Hmm.
going to work. So, lead by example.
Yeah. And also, company culture is now the new currency because I read it. Yeah, I read an article that said that, millennials or, and really it's not just millennials, it can be, any age, but people are more willing to go to a company for lower pay and better company
Yeah,
culture.
because there's I mean, if you think about how much time we spend working whether it's your career or it's a job, it's a significant part of your life, and it's either going to drain the hell out of you or it's going to empower you and make you feel
Mhm.
good. And it's that culture that makes the difference. And I really think that as young students and professionals, as anyone is evaluating where they're going to land, you want to get to know that culture and understand it and make sure you feel comfortable with it and be a part of it. Like I know when my stepson was interviewing for different positions out of college, some of the companies, great companies, like bring you in and let you spend time with the teams, and you have activities with them before you've even accepted the position, so that you can feel if it's a match for you. So I agree, Megan. Company culture, that is the currency, and something so important that you need to build and pay attention to and invest in.
Well, I'll tell you, yeah, no, you're absolutely right. You know what, Deirdre, I we cannot thank you enough for coming on and speaking not only about the group work and sort of the how we can work better, not just as students but as professionals, but also telling us about that feel first, all your feel first research so far. If people want to, obviously follow you on Twitter, we're going to have the links to all your profiles, Twitter, LinkedIn, but we'll also put the blog on there as well. But is there anything else that before we go that you would like to share with the audience as far as how we can continue to evolve as professionals?
Yeah, oh, thank you. I would just say that we all have to help one another stick together, learn together, and grow. And most of all, Jason, I think it was you who said, listen. That's so important today. And it's not just about leaders sharing their business acumen and advice, but we should be listening to younger professionals. And I believe in reverse mentoring. I've learned so much from everybody around me, and that we need to be present and be more open when we listen.
Well, again, thank you so much for taking the time, and we'll make sure to have everyone have your information. They can see it right on the episode site. But again, thank you for being such a great guest. Thank you for all the intelligence and the things you've shared over the years with me. But thank you as well for sharing them with our audience. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Deirdre. It was wonderful chatting with you, and your insight is absolutely invaluable. So thank you so much for being here with us today.
Well, thank you. I'm so happy that you both are doing this, and I really enjoyed being on your show. So
Great. Thanks,
thanks.
Deirdre.
Thanks, Deirdre.
Well, there you have it, everyone. Deirdre Breakenridge. Wasn't she freaking awesome, Jason?
That you know what?
Oh
I'm
my
never.
God. Like,
I
can she come back every week?
I
Like,
know. Yeah, that's the sort of thing that I was talking about at the earlier before we got into the interview is that she always finds a way to put things in, and I don't mean to sound cliche, she puts it in perspective. That's
yeah.
why she's been so successful, and that's why I hope when I look back on my career that I could say, you know what, I did it hopefully as well as Deirdre did it, not to her level. But she's such a great friend and just really really has been a great part of my career, and a great part of many people's careers. She just gets it she's human, and I think
Hmm.
that human element is what we all should be looking for. How can we relate to the student? How can we relate to that Fortune 500 professional, not just in our country, but how can we relate to people worldwide? And I think that's the great thing about Deirdre is that she's over the years she's taken all of these things and is still fascinated by communications, that she just continues to evolve and help tell people stories and learn from them as well.
Yeah, she was just amazing. We encourage everybody to go to the show notes, and we have links in there as to how to connect with Deirdre on the social space, online. And again, Deirdre, I'm sure you're listening. Thank you so much for being on our show. She was just amazing.
Yeah, it's nice when you can get someone to come on and they understand where things are going. They understand the industry, but they also understand that you know it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be something where you're getting so technical and sound like it's a strategic plan. You can still, get on a podcast and discuss things as if you would, as if you were talking about, just classes or even going about, understanding what you need to do tomorrow. And I think that's as I said earlier, the human element. We need to be more human. And I think Deirdre brings that. And I think we're, obviously with the podcast, that's our goal, is to make sure that people understand, students, professionals, that we're human. We want to bring you those people that get it and it doesn't sound stiff. It doesn't sound regurgitated. It's something that's honest and transparent. And I think in many ways, Deirdre epitomizes those words.
Absolutely. Well, again, thank you for listening, everyone. You can find us on Google Play, Spotify, and iTunes. We are taking over the podcast world.
Yes.
And so please share this podcast with someone who you think would benefit from it. Leave us a review on iTunes, and we will see you next time on episode 5 of Pints and Pizza with Professors. Thanks, everyone.
See you next week, everybody.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Pints and Pizza with Professors. If you like what you've heard today on the podcast, we'd be so grateful if you'd leave us a review on whatever platform you're listening on.
Also, connect with us on social, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, Facebook, you know where to go, at Pints Pizza Props. If you have a question, we'll answer it on the podcast. Use the hashtag Pints Pizza Props.
Once again, I'm Megan Wagner.
And I'm Jason Malika. Cheers.